Try to come find you. I heard you had a prepare to talk about women and women. Do you want to talk about that today? This part or no?
Yeah, I was going to talk about how structural values that we disregard. Because I actually wrote a book on women in peacebuilding at the beginning during the 10 years. Nobody's heard of it, right? Because we don't talk about that part.
Well, it doesn't come up from the audience, which I don't think it will. Are you okay if I weave it in somehow?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think we're ready to start if you guys want to come back in. We're ready for our discussion part. Hopefully you guys are getting your questions in your mind. And we're going to start with the panel and with David and Patrick, and then we'll turn time over to you guys. So you can start thinking of your questions to ask them. I'm Amanda Ford, for those of you that don't know me. I teach here in the Peace Building program. I teach a family peace building class, and I teach mindfulness, and I teach the intro to peace building. So it was so wonderful for us to have this conference. I'm often crying of just happiness. We kind of made the joke about that. Well, Patrick said that we're not in Zion yet, but I feel like this is like a little piece of Zion for me. I know it's because it's very like-minded and kind-hearted, good people. And when we get in a room together like that, it just feels really great. And it's also the happiest I get to see my husband. So it makes me really happy to see him so happy. Lots of smiling, lots of laughter, lots of tears. We've had such a great time so far. Thank you, Patrick and David, for writing this book. Thank you for being here. I'm also so grateful that I get to moderate with people that I really respect and love. David Whippy, who I've learned so much from, being able to work with him and teach with him. And Tina, who I don't know as well, but I already love her and feel like I've learned so much just from her talk today. And I know she has so many more things that she could offer for the Peace Building program, and I'm grateful that we got to hear from her today. And then Ben Cook, who knows my husband well, but I just got to meet recently. Thank you for that talk. I felt like it could have been a 121 talk or a lesson in our Peace Building program. So it went perfectly for what we've been studying. And I'm going to turn the time over first. I guess we'll start with David and Patrick as a response to the wonderful talks that we heard today.
Yeah, thanks. And I feel the same way, Amanda. You know what the Savior said, you know, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, or 50 or 60 or 70, you know. So I think we're all feeling that. Mostly, I just have a lot of words of appreciation for these 3 panelists who taught me so much. I am a neophyte, especially to Pacific Island kind of cultures and strategies of peace building. So, Christina, first of all, thank you for sharing that personal family story, which is so poignant, but as a way to help us think through this Ifonga as this really powerful tradition. And and I think it paired so well with what you were talking about, David. Just that each of these cultures around the world, and here we were thinking specifically about some of the Pacific Island cultures, have developed these strategies for handling conflict. And I loved I think it was Tavita who said this yesterday, where he said, like, when you're on a little island, you got to figure out how to make it work, right? And it actually has gotten me thinking about this is a really rough theory that probably won't play out with any kind of scrutiny. But I think people coming from Eurasia and then coming and settling in the Americas, there was this sense of like just unlimited land, right? And of things that we could conquer, things that we could possess. It's really hard to possess the ocean, right? But there's this sense of being able to possess land and then, of course, dispossess the peoples that live there. And so we have this tragic history of colonialism and imperialism that comes out of a European and Euro-American context. And so I was so grateful, and I think it's one of the main takeaways I'm going to have leaving this conference is the importance of recovering, listening to all of these traditional cultural ways of peace building that we see all over the world, that there is so much wisdom. There's a reason why these things have worked, right? Why these traditions have taken hold, because they do work, but they're deeply grounded in these cultural contexts. And then I think for me, this connects with what Ben was talking about. I too, obviously we wrote it, but I really believe that one of the things that Latter-day Saint culture, as it develops, we're like so young, 200 years, right, compared to these cultures that are hundreds, thousands of years old. And so we're so young, we're still developing a culture, but I think the ward is so central to that. And everything that means and what we can bring and what we can accomplish in the ward. I mean, I just think it is truly a revealed organization for making us Christians and making us peace builders, making us giving us opportunities to do what we can do. So I think even framing it, I had never thought about it in terms of connecting with track 2 diplomacy. I thought that was brilliant, Ben. So for me, like this whole afternoon was just a whole lot of learning, a whole lot of appreciation. I was scribbling all kinds of notes and thinking about things. The only thing I'm going to say is that David, we're not writing part 2. That's your job. So, maybe the whole panel, you can do that.
Amen. This has been. In every sense of the word, I think a fulfillment of the vision that Chad and Spencer and others had for this conference, which is, it felt a little strange to say we're going to focus on this book and then, because that's just not traditional way a conference works. Everybody brings their ideas and it's kind of a hodgepodge in most conferences, but. So it's been a little strange to be to have this book as the focus, but at the same time, I think it has been wonderful to see the way in which it has kind of given us something to start with, and what Patrick and I both had hoped the book would be a starting point, and this demonstrates probably better than anything I've seen how different perspectives just explode open the possibilities of peace. Thank you for being so generous in reading the book and responding to it, and thank you for what you have brought and added to and helped us to see in terms of the possibilities. And how much is still yet to be done, and how many books and volumes are yet to be written. And I'm really excited when David writes volume 2 for this, because I think outlined perfect topics that need to be explored. So I don't think I have much more to add, because everything Patrick said is just a simple amen. I have tons of questions I would love to ask, but we'll kind of maybe those will grow out as our conversation continues.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate being able to have this space together. There are lots of questions, I think, for all of us. And so maybe starting with Patrick and I were talking a little bit about a question directed for David and Tina. If you want to frame that question, Patrick.
Yeah, and this builds on, again, this appreciation for learning these peace-building traditions and practices from all around the world. So as we think about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which, even though those of us who believe in it and have testimonies of it, we believe that it's global, that it's universal, right? That it speaks to the entire world. Of course, it emerged in a particular historical time and place, right? And the church developed in a particular time and place, primarily in the United States, and then especially in the Western United States and Utah. So then it picks up a lot of that culture with it. So I'm interested in your thoughts of the ways that these particular restoration scriptures or concepts or other things that again have universal application but come out of a particular historical context. What happens when that meets these other cultures, whether it be in Samoa, in Fiji, and in other places? What does that negotiation look like? I mean, you talked about a post-colonial context, right? And I think we have to apply, I think, a stronger post-colonial lens even within the church to think about these cultural interactions that we've had across cultures. So I wonder if you could I'm just really curious to hear you think about, are there ways in which some of these Western paradigms that have come with missionaries and others, are there ways that they've rubbed up against, or what is the relationship to some of these more indigenous traditions? Does that make sense? I'd love to hear, Ben, if you have anything too, but I was really thinking about it from these two talks.
You get to start, David. No? Okay.
Yeah, I think just thinking about the church in Fiji and how the early church grew. I've got uncles and aunties who are pioneers in the church. And just by oral tradition that's been passed down, a lot of the values that obviously are part of the restoration, a part of our scriptures, are values that are shared within the culture. The importance of family, the opportunity to be together with your family forever, the importance of listening to chiefs or representatives from the Lord that are not passed away. There's not only that are prophets that are nowadays, and continue to receive modern day revelation. These are some of the things, not only in Fiji but also in other parts of Polynesia, that connected, I think, with indigenous people, and that allowed a lot of our indigenous people to join the LDS church in flocks, if you can say that. I know in Fiji there was a push, and this came with the colonization, where Christianity and chiefs had accepted Christianity. They call it Valuni Lotu, where they had wars pushing Christianity in other parts of the country. And if you look at it that way, Christianity, in a sense, or a lot of violence was attributed to or connected to Christianity, because it was seen, if you don't follow this religion or this way of being in the world, then your family would be, your village or your vanua, your tribe would be wiped out. And so in Fiji in particular, a lot of tribes would join just so that they could not be killed. Later on, when the LDS missionaries came, like I said, a lot of these restoration principles and values connected with what they believed in the culture. And I like to say there was a vast movement to join the LDS church.
Yeah, so Christianity, like I said in my response, is that Samoa, the sort of the theme is Samoa is founded on God. So when Christianity came about, it was widely accepted by the people because there have been myths and stories about, this God, and it's very relative to, indigenous understanding of a God. And so it was, accepted, widely accepted by the people in Samoa. And it took on a new form in the sense that it merged. Christianity got infused with cultural values and practices. But on top of that, like what David mentioned, is a lot of our cultural practices and values are Christian values. I don't know if it's the other way around, or if the values were there before Christianity came, or the values were there, Christianity sort of, brought that, maybe emphasized some of these values and traditions. But there were also traditions that we couldn't perform because of Christianity. And I think, there is that, that's why there's issues today with, particularly in the political arena, how Christianity influences, the political realm. And preachers and pastors and, specific churches in Samoa play a huge role in influencing the people's mind on how they vote on certain political issues. So Christianity is pretty much in the fabric of the Samoan, culture and tradition. It's been infused with the Samoan culture and tradition because the values merged very neatly and very nicely in a woven mat. But also Christianity also, we are a very hierarchical system. We have a chief system, and within that system, right, everybody has a responsibility to the family and to the village. But Christianity also had, its disadvantages in the sense that it reinforces these structures of power. And one of the things that came out of that is structural violence against women. Because the scriptures, and I think your book talks about that in the interpretation of certain scriptures and certain phrases in the scripture, there is a lot of that going on in Samoa where certain chiefs and, males and men, fathers, whatever, would interpret the scripture to mean that women are inferior, to the men. But if you go back and look into the Samoan culture, this idea of the va, the relationship, the relational space between, different peoples, that's, husband and wife, children, the village, all of that, there is that mutual respect and understanding. And once that respect and understanding is ruptured, then these conflicts emerged. And, Christianity sort of, emphasized or maybe brought about, these structures of power. And just people not, interpreting the scriptures to mean that because in the scripture it says that the woman is the neck and the man is the head, which means that the woman is, inferior to men in this space, in this hierarchical space. And it took years. It took years for that to kind of, change the mindset of people and understanding. And if Samoa, God-fearing people, and the Bible is it, right? Whatever the Bible says, we can't go against that. That's blasphemy. And so, these kind of reinforcement of these tough power structure, came about because of that as well. So it took a while to sort of get out of that. And I think, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's really different because women have their own organizations, which is regarded in the sense of decision making, and so I think that's probably another reason why our church was very attractive. It's very different from, say, La Mosa, and other churches where these hierarchies are very traditional. But in the Latter-day Saints, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that wasn't it. It was a lot more equality within this structure. So it made it more, attractive to a lot of people in Samoa.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you, David. That's really helpful to hear and try to understand the difference between, I actually think when Patrick and I were thinking of tension, you both actually went to what was connecting you and why it was so easy to accept Christianity and the connection between. Is there any, on the other side of the tension that comes up, and I don't know, David, thinking about maybe modern day more tension with culture and the idea of going to church, and like, what does that look like, or what is being a member of a ward? Is there any tension culturally that comes to mind?
Well, I think for Fiji, maybe Fiji in particular is with with the drinking of kava.
Yeah, that's actually what was on my
With the
mind,
drinking
but
of
I was
kava,
like,
they're
I
only
wonder
used
if
for
that's
ceremonial purposes. But then the different ceremonial purposes are by watching a rugby game every Friday and Saturday night. That's a ceremony I do with watching rugby. But that's been the call from the various leaders that have come down to Fiji, that because not only in the act of drinking kava, but the conditions around it take men and women away from their families. Finances that's supposed to spend on the family has been spent on kava, and it's spent on late nights, and spent on other things, socializing in places that you're not supposed to, socializing with people you're not supposed to be socializing with. And so there's been some murmurs around kava drinking and the absence of it within the Fijian culture, while within the LDS, Latter-day Saint culture, while in other religions in Fiji, other Christian denominations, the drinking of kava is a big part. It's closely, like Tina was saying, it's closely tied to the church, and there'll be services, and afterwards there'll be kava ceremonies, and then follow with other services. And so that's where I see if there's some conflict within the LDS culture, with all the Latter-day Saint culture in Fiji, it's around the kava drinking.
Anything else in mind, Tina?
I think it's very similar. I mean, we have kava ceremonies too in Samoa, and that was a hard thing to swallow for a lot of Samoans and Pacific Islanders. Is you're told by the leaders that kava drinking we shouldn't be doing that because it takes everybody away from their families. So I think that, and maybe traditional tattooing is also another. I think you see the revival of traditional tattooing today, and I think we know the scriptures. The temple is the body is the temple of God, and so I think that's also something that Samoans had to struggle with, in the sense of the types of maybe teachings and doctrines. But I'm not sure where the church stands on traditional tattooing today. I really don't. So, but there is a revival of that, and I think it's sort of trying to hold on to identities. A lot has been lost in Pacific Island cultures, and so there's very few things. For some, a lot has been. For some cultures, they lost a lot more than others. Like David's from Fiji, and Fiji still, it's an independent country. I'm from Samoa, and we still have our lands, and it's an independent country. But I can't say the same for the Maoris in New Zealand, or the Aborigines in Australia, or Rapa Nui in Easter Island. So these people, I mean, they have a lot more sort of traumatic, and a lot more, their experience is a little bit different from ours. And so, that's sort of trying to hold on to an identity is also a cause of conflict. And for us, that's what, and I think David, really went deep into that, right? Decolonizing the space so that we can talk about these things that we weren't allowed to talk about. And addressing, conflict, you can't understand peace if you don't understand conflict. And there is always a root to the conflict. And if we don't address that root, right, I think as Latter-days, we have a tendency to sort of brush everything under the carpet and don't want to talk about it. And, within the wards, I think that's a big part of that, is we're really trying to save face and be nice to each other. Do your ministering, but deep down inside, you still have your differences, right? The fact that I'm not, I'm from Samoa, so-and-so is from somewhere else. You still have those preconceived biases, that you have because of your own experiences. So we go through a routine to take care of your neighbor, to do your ministering, to, all of that within the ward. But I know, and I'm that deep down inside, we still have these differences that I think we need to get to the root of that in order for the just ward to really, take off.
Oh, do you want more,
Just
David?
adding on to what Tina was saying there, I think a big part of decolonizing this space is, and from my perspective, is not totally disregarding what we're learning from Western philosophy, like I was talking about, Western content and Western education, but it's just providing the space for indigenous worldviews, knowledge to be acknowledged. And a lot of times in that colonized space, that opportunity was not given. I worked with Lucretia Hussein, who's going to be speaking to us tomorrow, and we will go into a lot of communities, and we share about, we did a lot of work with an organization called the Pacific Center for Peace Building, and we're talking about trying to educate on direct violence and cultural violence, and we knew they understood, but what really stood out for them was, we know what this is, but we're just trying to, a lot of the feedback was, this is your view, it's a Western view, yes, we understand it, but in a way it's a privileged view, because we are just trying to survive and have peace with each other in our village. And if we don't do what we're supposed to do in our roles, then there will be violence, then there will not be peace within this space. And that was eye-opening to me, because I came from a perspective of, okay, you gotta frame everything this way. And I was learning from the indigenous views about their spaces and how they viewed violence and peace. Yes, sir.
One of the things that I've loved about the presentations, both from David and Christina and Tavita yesterday, was how much can be learned in the West from you talk about sort of the colonized space and decolonizing space, but how much is missing in Western culture, conflict resolution, that could benefit from these traditional practices. When Tavita got up and he's not from Hawaii, right? And he stood and said, and gave respect and reverence to this place and people as an outsider, right? And I thought that was so beautiful. And I thought, I was thinking back in Provo, I do mediation for parties in conflict. Can you imagine someone from American Fork coming to Provo saying, as someone from American Fork, I want to acknowledge, people in Provo. And, that seems, the fact that it sounds so funny, I think underscores what's lost in when the U.S. is not a collectivist culture. And sure, there are advantages to individualist kind of ethos, but I think sort of that respect for land and culture and the ritual that comes around having difficult conversations in conflict. When I'm at a mediation table, typically with people, the mediator is a neutral person, and in Utah, that's legally required to be neutral. And in collectivist cultures, people think that's great. Why would you have a neutral person who doesn't care about the parties sit and try and help broker a solution? Why wouldn't you have somebody who knows your family and is deeply rooted? And there's so much, and practically speaking, it's hard to implement that, right? But I think there's a lot lost, and it makes, it's making me think, how can you draw from some of these beautiful ways of going about having these really hard things that happen to your brother, and is there a way to create ritual? And even in the creation of a ritual, that could be a really powerful exercise. You bring parties together and say, we have no ritual here, so we're going to create ritual that'll help us work through these really hard issues. And drawing from some of these traditional practices seem like it could be really powerful, but I think a lot is lost. There's a lot that's been developed in peace building, theories and approaches and stuff. But as I've heard these presentations, I think it's exciting to think about, what are new ways that the West could really learn from this. That's why I think it's amazing to have this conference here instead of somewhere like BYU Provo. I think it's a totally different experience and so much more valuable than it would have been great there. But this has been really phenomenal.
I actually want to build on that. My question was along some similar lines. I'd like to turn that decolonization lens on the book and ask the question from your perspective as someone who was trained kind of and this is open to everyone, but David, you kind of prompted this for me. As someone who was trained in kind of Western peace building, found that that did not translate completely or effectively. And one of the questions I have is, where are the blind spots currently in the book? Where have our Western approaches to this a theology of peace, how do if you were to decolonize our approach, where would those points be, and what do you think we've missed, and where are the opportunities to open up the space for other ways of thinking about a theology of peace?
I was during the break. I was talking to Emily Sinkovich out here, and we were talking about how a story of the Anti-Nephi-Lehi's were, and from my Western perspective, and I was raised in the church. That was the only kind of story that I've heard, and I think part of decolonizing that space is going out there looking for people, stories like the Maoriori that connect to that space. That there are traditions like that that are relevant and are still at play today. I think from my perspective, just being open to these different lenses when you're working in communities, it's humbling. It's going in with this attitude of being humble, to recognize that I am not the carrier of knowledge, but I'm there, as I said at the start of the conference, bringing my basket, willing to share with you, and being open to recognize that this farmer or that this person living on a subsistence living or a fisherman is more knowledgeable with the traditions of their space than I am, coming in from outside with a Western perspective. Sometimes that can be, for me, that's very humbling, knowing that these, in the general world, looking at it, there may be different levels to it, but being humble enough and that can prick at the ego and talk about pride of heart, but being willing to learn from alternate spaces of knowledge and experience, and being open to that. That can, for me, maybe speaking personally, that can be a hard thing, and so I have to be open to being educated that way. Did you want to
I think for me, as I was reading the book, I was reading it from a Latter-day Saint, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ lens. So as I was reading the book, right, I highlighted everything, and David was like looking at my book like, wow, you have a lot of highlights. That's just because that's how I, and it's, I was reading it from that lens, right? Sometimes I made a lot of comparison, with what was written, and then to my culture and to Oceania and to other Pacific Island countries. And I think I agree with what David has brought up. Maybe it's not supposed to be in this book. Maybe it's another book to this, where you now compare the theology of our church, right, to other diverse ways of understanding peace and conflict. Because we talked about that yesterday. All these diverse, understanding and thoughts and knowledge is very important for us to get to peace, right? Sustainable peace is, it becomes an individual thing. Even if you're part of a collective society, you as an individual have a responsibility to that collective society. And the word stewardship, and David brought that up in his presentation, and I was speaking with Tevita yesterday, Dr. Kaili, and we were talking about that, right? Because his was looking at the relationship between humans and the environment, which has always been the way we saw, right, peace for us as Pacifica people or Oceanic people, that the environment is really a part of us. The ocean, the land, they're all part of us. And I think that's another lens that we can look at it, right? You brought up, climate conflict, and it bypasses all the human problems that we have today, because it now becomes a common thread for all of us, something that brings us together to know that, okay, we have to come together and figure something out. So there's a lot going on. It becomes complex. But going back into that is being open to the many diverse, ideas and thoughts on how to address peace and conflict, because there's so much out there that might just be the solution, or maybe not the solution, but the way forward, to move forward. And it's also knitting the relationship, which is so important in our cultures, is relationship. So it weaves all these relationships together, because we're always gonna, in the Latter-day Saint, in the Church of Jesus Christ, right, gospel, right, that we are all connected with one. We came from the same Father. So, I mean, the beauty of this earth is the diversity that we have, but we have to understand that when we go back, we're all gonna be the same, brothers and sisters in the gospel, so.
Thank you, Tina. I'm going to open it up to the audience, making sure we have enough time. Yeah. Sorry, Emma, there's a microphone coming. Yeah, do you want me to do it?
Test, test. Thank you, Sydney. First of all, thank you. Absolutely fantastic today. And I want to say that I really appreciate this talk about culture. And I really hope that the goal is to demystify culture. Because I think what happens when you live in a dominant society is you have the in culture and then you have the other cultures that are somehow, I don't know, mystified. And so I love that we're having this dialogue, especially since 2 weeks ago at church, I heard someone say that when you join the church, you have to leave your culture behind and you have to stick to church culture. And which was really interesting to me in this last few years, because it was my upbringing that first taught me the values that I embraced as a member of the church when I joined the church. And yet, during this crazy political warring that was going on between members, so much of the values that I had been taught about being kind and honest and seeking leadership that is godly and focusing more on God as a leader than your manly leaders, all of it was just being washed down the toilet. So I think it's so important that we're having this discussion, and that we recognize that while we're different cultures, because we come from different people, thank God that we're all different, we are all of the culture of Heavenly Father's children. And all of our cultures are equally important. And so thank you for this. It legitimizes so much of the feelings that you have as a woman, a person of color in this field that is dominantly male. And thank you for all the organizers for this.
Thank you, Emma. I think we could all echo that gratitude. A question? Yeah, thanks. If you want to just wait the microphone.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm gonna just echo what she said. Thank you so much for all of the effort that all of you have put in. And I was listening to you, David, about what you were talking about with how important it is to go into these communities to be open to different lenses and different ways of seeing things, and how we have to go in with the attitude of being humble, not with the perspective that I'm the bearer of all knowledge. And so I was wondering if you think that could be applied to missionary work, which we see is so prevalent in our church. And so, yeah, I was just wondering your thoughts on that, how that could be applied. I think primarily for full-time missionaries, but then also as member missionaries.
Yeah, I think definitely it can be applied to missionaries, not only, maybe not in the lessons that they share, but I've seen missionaries in the Fiji Islands go in, and before they actually start teaching, I think it's general with missionaries around the world. What can we help you with? Can we be of service? And I've been in communities where you see the missionaries, with their trousers and their lava-lavas or sulus rolled up and working in kalo plantations, and haven't really taught the families anything yet. But through their example and learning from them, it's an opportunity to open doors, maybe not for them at that particular time, but for other missionaries that come later on. So I definitely think that while maybe with the message that they share, they can be willing to exchange with some of the local legends or local knowledge that they have, I think that missionaries can go in with an attitude of, I think they normally go in with an attitude of being humble, of being willing to learn, of being willing to work in these spaces, And then when the indigenous or the Indo-Fijians are ready to be able to receive these messages, that's an opportunity to go in and share.
Great question. Thank you. Eliza?
This question is mostly for Ben. Just thinking about that stampede. So I'm a principal of an elementary school, and thinking about all the gun violence that is happening, and even before that, the war in Ukraine and all these displaced Ukrainians around the world, these children around the world. It does feel very overwhelming. I mean, as I was listening to Patrick talk, I just was crying because the world is just in chaos right now. And so I guess my question is, what do you do in the face of that chaos, and how do you handle that stampede coming toward you? I mean, I know you talked a little bit about awards, but how do you overcome that feeling of just, we're going to the abyss and there's nothing I can do?
That's such a great, hard question. And I wrestle with that question all the time. And I feel like, I vacillate between hope and despair a lot, whether it's Israel-Palestine or the United States or Provo, Utah specifically, So I don't know that I have a good answer, to be honest. I mean, so what I personally do, I think, and this is maybe Amanda's field, mindfulness is really important. And if I feel overwhelmed, I need to sit with that and be present and let it, what is it that's teaching me? I think that's really important. And not pushing it away, right? Inviting it in. What is causing me to feel overwhelmed? I think somehow love is always, it's always got to be, rooted in love instead of fear. And if I start fearing and that's what's motivating me, then I need to sit and listen to what fear is saying too. And somehow, I think getting to a place of curiosity. I thought Melissa's experience at the school board meeting was so powerful because it's so hard. And that moment she describes just, those moments, there's so many of them, across, any particular day, that's one of the reasons it was so powerful. It's sort of so ordinary, right? This wasn't even, it wasn't a school shooting, right? It was a school board meeting. And it was so painful to just hear her describe it to me, as she said. And so what that looks like, I think for all of us is going to be really different, but I think kind of, trying to navigate back to love, right? And that sounds so generic and cliche, but it's cliche for a reason, right? Cliches are powerful truths, and so to somehow discover the newness of the cliche. What does it mean? What does it mean to act out of love in this moment, right? And to be curious, right? And so how can I be curious? And I think like the message in Chad's book, for example, and seeing a person as a person and asking yourself in this moment, if I were to see this person, as a fellow brother or sister, what would I think to say or do? And so I guess I would just acknowledge it's really hard, and I think love is somehow the answer, but it's a struggle to kind of that's our work, right? Is to figure out how we can act in love in any given moment.
Thank you.
I just totally agree, and I just want to. I'm just thinking about what President Nelson talked about in this last general conference, right? That there's this war going on in Ukraine. Clearly, his heart is breaking. He's talking about the time that he's spent there, the people that he knows and loves there, and also a sense of he's the prophet of the Lord, but he's powerless to stop this conflict. But he said, what can we do as Latter-day Saints? What can we do as as followers of Jesus Christ? Well, I don't know if you can stop the conflict in Ukraine, but what can you do about the conflict in your life? And in some ways it sounds, the conflict in Ukraine still really matters, right? And we should care deeply about that. But the fact of the matter is, I cannot do anything directly to stop it. I can do all kinds of things. I can send support to help you refugees. I can educate myself. I can support all kinds of efforts, right? But there are certain forces that are bigger than me. But But what would it mean for every person in this room? What would it mean for every person in the church, every person in President Nelson's earshot to follow that prophetic counsel? Then you start to scale up a little bit. So sometimes in the church, I think we focus almost exclusively on the personal and interpersonal. That's really important. So I think we do need to pay attention to the structural, to the macro, and so forth. That isn't language that we're always very comfortable with. Those aren't modes that we're very familiar with operating in. But that interpersonal stuff really matters. And so for me, I just absolutely, it just sank deep in my heart. Obviously, I was inclined to agree with him, but that was prophetic counsel for the world in 2022, whatever year we're in. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. We'll open it back up. Yeah.
Sorry, I already have the mic. So, my question is, as I was listening about the colonization and viewpoints, and also with Ben's how to stop this stampede and track 1 and track 2, and then what Patrick just said about looking at the macro and structural violence that may be going on in our church culture, I think about the traces of colonization in the culture and structure of our church. I mean, if we just look at a chapel, that is a very Western setup of how we worship, right? In these rows with a pulpit at the front, with a general handbook of how we need to pass the sacrament. I mean, it's divine, and yet it's also specifically from a lens of someone maybe from Salt Lake City. And I mean, I serve my mission at Temple Square, and there's a very large church office building that I would look at every day, and all these people do, and they're wonderful people, but they sit in cubicles and write, and they write these manuals, and these manuals, we study them on Sunday and come follow me in seminary and Relief Society and all these things. And what are some of your ideas, this is open to all of you, of how we can change maybe the structural violence and colonization of the church that can then help the culture of our church be a culture of peace?
Such a great question. Thank you, Sydney.
I'm going to let David answer it. But your question, Sydney, we sent this manuscript out, or the Maxwell Institute sent it out to several readers before it was published, different generations and so forth. And almost all of our young college-aged readers, that was their question. So David's going to answer it.
In these moments, I always go to Gandhi. Be the change you want to see in the world. You know, it's that bumper sticker. But there's some real truth to that. If we want more equitable arrangements, we have to. It kind of goes back to the same question, the same thing. If we're going to solve the conflict in the world, the direct conflict in the world, the big conflict, we have to start with our own conflicts. And then if we want structural changes, if we want structural and cultural violence that might occur even in our own church community to change, then we have to root that out ourselves, out of ourselves. We have to begin to treat everyone with the same equity, right? I believe deeply in the power of individuals to make a difference in the world. For me, one of my great heroes of the 21st century is Lima Bowie of Liberia, who, a social worker with no political power, no financial resources, began to organize a movement of women that brought Muslim and Christian women together and ended up stopping a brutal civil war in her country that had been, just been taken countless lives and ravaged families and just torn the whole society apart. Her work is just, to me, the example of what one ordinary person can do. And I believe the same thing in when it comes to all of our structures in our communities, and including the church. I've known teenagers who raise questions about equity in church programs and the way, for example, a girls' camp is being run, and the kinds of speakers that are being chosen, and and having the courage to go to her adult leaders and to raise those questions and ask about how can we create more equitable space for everyone in our local church. I believe those kinds of efforts can have rippling effects beyond. So I think there is power in addressing the inequalities, the structural and cultural violence that exists in all of our societies and even within our church community, by having the courage to use assertive love. And that means going out like the anti-Nephi Lehis and meeting the enemy on the battlefield. Doesn't mean sitting in homes waiting for change. It means going out, but doing it. Of course, the key is they honestly did love those that were attacking them, and honestly had concern for them. And they referred to them as their brethren. They were insisting upon that connection with them, and that's the way we make changes in our structures as well. When we make the structure abstract, and when we objectify it because the structure is full of people, then we're not going to make the changes we need. When we see the humanity of the structure and the people within it, and we engage the inequality and the challenges with that insistence on seeing them that way, then we can make change. I think change is possible. I'm actually quite hopeful. I think we're at I'm kind of like Ben. I kind of fluctuate between hope and despair about most things in the world these days. But when I as someone who teaches with and interacts with young minds and hearts and souls on a daily basis, who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I have a great deal of hope for the future because of the ways in which they are addressing these issues and doing it with assertive love.
Real quick, quick story. So one of my heroes, woman that I love, is Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. She's recently retired from Harvard, a distinguished professor, Pulitzer Prize winner, a kind of feminist icon. And she came to my class once a few years ago when I taught down at Claremont. So I was there with a bunch of graduate students, and they all knew her work. I mean, she's just widely respected as this pioneering female historian and feminist historian. But she's also a Latter-day Saint. And my students, I'm glad that they had the courage of asking her. They said, Laurel, how in the world do you stay in this church that you could go down the list, right, of why it's hard for a feminist icon to do that. And she looked at them straight in the eye and she said, it's my church too. And so this sense of she wasn't going to let somebody else take away something that she loved deeply, and she spent her life not backing down from the things that she believes in deeply, the kind of equality that she's looking for, but also this is her community, this is her church, these are her beliefs, this is the gospel that's sunk deep into her heart, and so she said, I'm not going anywhere. And so she has worked in lots of different spaces to create space, not just for herself, but create space for others. And in that kind of community building, and also this kind of deep appreciation of this culture and religion that was, that she grew up with. So that notion of kind of taking ownership of it, not in a hostile, combative, or even possessive way, but saying, this is mine, and I'm invested here. I'm totally invested here, and I'm going to make the best of it that I can.
Thank you, Patrick. How are we on time? One more question? Okay. Yes. Naomi?
Thank you. My question is, question is for Christina and about the Ifonga. And I was wondering, when it comes to forgiveness, we talked about restorative justice, but I'm wondering about something that's tragic like domestic abuse or something that's almost reoccurring. So within the case of your brother, it was an accident. But what if it was the death of your daughter because the husband beat the daughter? Or the death of your child because she got raped, or just the rape of the child, your daughter? Is there room to accept the FOMA, realizing this is a community event, but still require the person who did the harm to get like therapy, or go to jail, or have counseling? So I'm thinking not so much on an accident like your situation, but someone where the person actually might not be as healthy in the community. Recognizing that if there has been an involvement done on his behalf, chances are the person will definitely be kept in line socially in a lot of different pressures that he wasn't beforehand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for your question. In fact, that's also in my response. I didn't have time to read because of the time. But yes, as I mentioned about Ifonga, it is also a reconciliation and healing process, which means that, somebody can still be turned, if it's a matter of rape, and there has been cases where that person is going to go to jail. But what's important in all of this is that Ifonga still has to be, it has to be done in order to mend these relations. So of course that person will go to jail for that, right? And then of course the relationships between the families are very important, and so you have that healing process. And part of the healing process is starting with this ritual, the Ifonga ritual. And I think Christianity also, I think it sort of helps support the Ifonga process. It's not just a ritual that's happening there, but the fact that Samoans are Christian people, and they've realized that, nobody's perfect. Everybody's going to make mistakes, right? Even some very heinous, mistakes. But it's that process that goes throughout the village, because it is a community. But there have been times where there's also banishment, right? I mean, there's shame involved in the reputation of the family, and so the village will then, banish the family, right, from the village. And so that has happened as well. So there are consequences with the law, right? But there have been times when families have said, look, and that has been the clash between customary and constitutional law, where the family of the victim will say, no, we don't want to press charges. But the police says, no, this person needs to go to jail because he's not only, has done harm to your family, but he's also harmful to the rest of society. So that also is, that also becomes a process. So, it's difficult, families, very traditional families would like to maintain the sanctity of the Ifonga, forgive and forget, and let's move on. But that has been the case, right? Throughout the years, is that you will go to jail for, raping somebody. But the hope is that we are going to mend the relationships. We're going to go through this healing process, and the person usually is, remorse, and the hope is that they don't do it again. And we don't want to perform another Ifonga, of course. You'll be stoned to death. No, I'm just kidding. That's not going to happen.
We have one more question. Oh. Go ahead, Mike. That means we're going to have two questions.
Now,
okay.
just real quick.
Okay.
Adam, I do believe that we need to have these conferences in Utah. And I think one of the reasons why is awareness has to be raised, right? Where we need to have these deeper conversations. And because we live in a global village, I think those things could be beneficial to other people outside. So, we're in a conference and we're talking about conflict and how we process it. And it makes sense to all of us sitting in the room. but what about the people who are outside of the room? And how do you get them to buy in? Now, I'm a product of intercultural studies, and I can remember the first day I went into Chad's class. And I had this experience where, I was gonna go into this major, and for the very first class, changed my life, right? I changed my major to ICS, and in answer to David's question about like how do these islanders, right, change their lens in embracing some kind of Western kind of concept and come out of our hands and allow our people to make sense of it. And I'll tell you, there's this kind of like on potluck, yeah. You go to the potluck, and there's all this food is there, and what ends up happening with, let's be truthful, most times when you go over there, you eat your own food, right? Why? Because it's number one, it's safe, right? Right? I'm not gonna get sick because and the second is that I made it, right? So I think what was the benefit for me in those years ago and learning Harbinger and even Dangerous Love and all these other things is, for the first time I went to this table that had this different theoretical frameworks, and I digested it and I tried to make sense of it. And I think we're all in that same boat where everybody around us doesn't believe peace can exist, and we're the only ones in this room. Peace can happen, right? And there's these things that I've learned, these articles that I've read, and I can still quote from to this day, right? About lashing and unlashing, taking these concepts, putting them on, taking them off, and figuring it out. And I think that, it makes sense to everybody who's sitting in this room, but there's a lot of things that we need to consider. And one of the things that I want to ask the question was, is even here in Hawaii, there's cultural trauma that has happened that don't allow us to come to the table. Why? Because the narratives that have surfaced year over year, right? Even in this building peace class that I had, we've talked about things that have happened in the community, and just because we talk about it, and just because we show them videos and these articles, that doesn't necessarily translate to behavioral change. Yeah, I recognize, just like Chad's story about TK's bike, somebody would steal his bike, and they came running, sorry I stole your bike, but I will keep the bike. So those things are happening, and the thing, I think the biggest takeaway that I've had in my experiences is I recognize what the West offers, but it's just like Chad says about the shoes. Not all these theoretical frameworks, when you put them on, wouldn't fit, right? So I do believe that David needs to write part 2, and Tina needs to be, we need more representation where these stories not only connect the world, more importantly, connect our people. If the position of the university is going to go 75% Oceanic Pacific Asia, right? Then how are we going to help them gravitate towards this need for peace, not only in their land, but when they return home, right? I bet you if I were to ask you what the percentage is of the peace builders in the program, if you took a percentage of the Pacific Islanders as opposed to the West or the domestic, it'd be definitely more in one area, right? So I think that number one, like David was saying, right? We need to write our own stories and help our own people, so that if our own people can, then they can influence others. And the way they're going to influence that is they go to these conferences, Adam, and they share their narrative too, right? It's not so much that the West, it's a challenge of theoretical frameworks between the West and the Pacific. It's the humanity of finding out, how do I make sense of it, and what kind of framework could we build that would resonate with our own people, and how they do that. So my question, just again, is what is the university, what are some of the suggestions that you would have for the university that could promote that?
Thank you, Terry. Does anyone want to answer that? I think we're running short on time, so a quick answer. Go ahead. Sorry. The mic is right there, David. Did you say yes, David? Oh, no, okay. Somebody's gonna answer our question. Ben? Dina?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Thank you. Carrie. Sorry. Terry. He has a twin, so yeah, I've been here at the university for 19 years. I've been teaching here as an adjunct faculty and now an assistant professor, and I totally understand what you're saying here. It's for me, with my experiences, like, everybody asks me, how do you just survive in, an environment where there is white, male-dominated environment. So as a Pacific Island woman and a minority, I said I survive because I don't actually look at the politics. I look at why I'm here in the first place, which is the students. I went to BYU Hawaii, and I understand the struggle. So I bypass that and look at what can I do to help the students. And I've been doing that all these years with internships and other things that I do for the university. But at the same time, there's that insecurity and that fear that the moment you say something, right, is you as maybe an adjunct, and I've been told that, where don't say anything because you're up for CFS, so you shouldn't say anything because you might not get to the next level. And so that's sort of the structural violence that we have to face as female, maybe Pacific Island professors here on campus. And there's not a lot of us. And so that's something that for me, it's a real experience for me, having to go through that. And I think maybe the way to move forward from this is getting more voices, right? Diverse voices, and having more staff, faculty members, support groups, mentors that mirror, the goal and the mission of this university. And that's important. So, yeah.
You good? Okay, thank you, Tina. That was a perfect response. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to turn the time over to Chad Ford because I want to make sure we have time. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions.
What a fantastic panel, and really appreciate all the wisdom and also the great questions we got. And yes, that's Terry Moai, who's also a peace building instructor for us, teaching our community peace building class as well. And so I want to acknowledge him, and thankful that he is here. One of our alumni, like so many of these others, David Whippy as well, Christina Akanoa, Tavita Kaili, Isaiah Walker, myself, that were actually students here. That are now back at the university. It's great to see this mixture of our talent and our knowledge with these other brilliant people like David and Patrick and Ben and Adam Miller and Melissa. It's so great to see this combination together. And as far as that happening in Utah, this is a great opportunity for the Maxwell Institute to be introduced to all of these amazing Indigenous scholars and to invite them out to speak in other areas as well. And so I hope this is a great introduction to so many of the brilliant and powerful people that we have here. Well, we're not done. We have, I think, an amazing session coming on Saturday, and we're going to meet over at the Polynesian Cultural Center. Sydney's going to put up a map. There it is. We put this map here because we're entering into a special gate. So if you've normally gone through the main entrance of the Polynesian Cultural Center or whatever, and you're wondering where we're getting in, because we're getting in early in the morning. And we're asking everyone to be there no later than 8 a.m., right? I think 8 a.m. Yeah, 8 a.m. at the gate. We'll be escorted in to the Maori village, where there'll be a special cultural protocol there. And I promise you, it is something that you do not want to miss. It is part of the conference. I think it's actually a critical part of what we're doing together. So please, 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 if you have that tendency to run 5-10 minutes late, this is not the workshop for you to do that. Get there 10 minutes early. We're going to meet right at that gate. So you see that gate is kind of right by the Marriott there. And you see the Marriott, that's the McDonald's. The McDonald's is kind of right over there. So as you walk right along there, we're going to enter at this gate. You'll be escorted in. And again, I can't recommend enough what's going to happen on Saturday, because our alumni are coming. We've talked about the culture of peace and the theology of peace. We're going to talk about the praxis of peace, and our alumni who are doing amazing work out in the field are coming to talk about what this looks like as Latter-day Saint peace builders in Fiji, in Hong Kong, in Salem, Oregon, in Nigeria, and the work that they've been doing there, and how they've taken these principles and dedicated their lives to this. And as one of their former professors, of course, I get very excited about this, but I know what's coming. I know the stories that are coming, and for those of you that are still on the fence about, is some of this possible? Can we actually really make a difference in these communities or whatever? I think we're in for a really inspiring session on Saturday. So please join us. And again, 8 o'clock at that gate, because we're going to be escorted together and for what I really think is going to be an amazing end to our conference, and a huge mahalo to the Polynesian Cultural Center and Kim Makakau, who is the head of the Maori Village, for hosting us there. For those of you that aren't from here, BYU Hawaii and the Polynesian Cultural Center, we are deeply connected with each other. Our students have powerful experiences both here and there. And the learning, including the peace-building learning, is happening both in the classroom but also in the work that's happening in the Polynesian Cultural Center. So to me, it was very appropriate and important that you get the whole experience here, and not just part of it. And so I think we're going to see something really special tomorrow. So really encourage you to come and attend that session. We'll also get to hear again from Patrick and David as well in that session, and Seamus Fitzgerald, who has been a huge part of our program here, but is now in doTERRA, but coming back to teach us as well. It's going to be a fantastic session, and we look forward to having you all tomorrow. Sydney, I think we're going to bring her up, and she's going to give us last little bits of logistics, and she'll invite our closing prayer for the evening.
Okay, so yes, tomorrow we'll be at the village. This is for all of our students that are also attending. So if you are walking to the PCC from campus, you can enter in from our back student gate, if that's easier for you. If you're driving from somewhere else, please park in this PCC parking lot that's right next to the Marriott. So you would enter in at the Marriott entrance and park to the left of that. And then you would just walk to that gate 5 right there. All right? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, so is the gate, I'm a little confused, is it the one that's on that side, like when you're at BYU and you walk through the back, or it's on the Marriott side?
It's on the Marriott side. So if you just...
But not near McDonald's, it's on this side?
Yeah, so if you go to the Marriott, find their pool. Hear the splashes, hear the screams. Go towards the PCC. We'll be there. Look for me. Look for Gracie, Olivia. We'll be like, come over here, and you'll find us, and we'll guide you. We'll guide you to New Zealand, our village. So we'll be there. There'll be ushers along the way to guide you to find peace. And again, please be there at 8 a.m. And again, just to reiterate, please do not be late. If you are late and you miss the cultural protocol, you actually will not be invited into the village. It's so important that you're there and this happens. That's kind of mean. I'm sure they'd let you in, but I'm trying to make you be on time. Okay, and then tomorrow for our speakers, after the session is over, for our speakers speaking tomorrow, please be timely in your presentations. There is a strict time we need to be out of the PCC. They are so gracious to have invited us there and let us be in this village. And PCC opens after our session, so we need to be out of there. We'll get lunch together, and then we'll re-enter ticketed to enjoy our festivities there. We'll have a tour and dinner and then the night show, which are all amazing. Many people can attest to that. If you have any questions about lunch, about dinner, about our PCC schedule, please talk to me and let me know and I can help you. And that is all the housekeeping I have for today. And then Rachel Moore is going to give us our closing prayer.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that